She crossed oceans for love, but in the frozen silence of the Canadian mountains, she discovered that the man she trusted wasn't building a future. He was collecting his next victim. Aisha had always dreamed of seeing snow. Growing up in the humid warmth of Karachi, she imagined a life somewhere quiet, surrounded by pine trees and misty mountains. When she met Daniel through a travel photography forum, it felt like fate stepping in. He was polite, well-spoken, and seemed fascinated by her culture. Their video calls stretched into the night, his soft Canadian accent soothing her worries. He told her he worked as an environmental researcher studying ecosystems in remote parts of British Columbia. Aisha admired his passion and the calm way he spoke about nature and solitude. Within months, their friendship turned into love, or at least what she believed love should feel like. Daniel sent her photos of snowy peaks and crystal-clear lakes, promising that she would see them all someday. He wanted to build a future together, away from noise and stress. When he proposed that she move to Vancouver, Aisha didn't hesitate. Her family was skeptical, but she assured them he was kind and genuine. She sold her belongings, quit her job, and booked a one-way ticket to Canada. When she landed, Daniel greeted her with flowers and a warm smile, his blue eyes glinting under the gray sky. Everything felt surreal, like a story unfolding exactly as it should. As they drove out of the city, Aisha gazed at the endless forests and mountains, feeling small but safe beside him. She believed she was heading toward a new beginning, unaware that each passing mile was taking her farther from safety and closer to something far darker than she could ever imagine. The dream that once seemed perfect was already beginning to unravel, though she couldn't yet see the signs. The first week in Vancouver felt like stepping into another world. The air was crisp, the sky heavy with clouds, and the mountains rose like silent guardians around her. Daniel's home was far from the lively city she had pictured. Instead of a cozy suburban house, he led her to a wooden cabin deep in the forest, hours away from any nearby town. The drive had been long and winding, and by the time they arrived, night had already swallowed the sky. The cabin was small, built of dark timber, and surrounded by towering evergreens that blocked the sunlight. Daniel told her the isolation would help him focus on his research, and she accepted his reasoning, trying to see beauty in the wilderness. At first, Aisha found the quiet peaceful. She spent her mornings watching mist drift across the valley and her evenings listening to the crackle of the fireplace. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to feel suffocating. There was no cell signal, and the internet only worked when Daniel turned on the generator. He said it was expensive to keep running, so it stayed off most of the time. Aisha wanted to explore the forest, but Daniel warned her about wild animals and getting lost. She started noticing how he avoided her questions about returning to the city. Sometimes, when she stepped outside, she felt as if someone, or something, was watching from between the trees. Daniel grew colder, distant, and secretive. He locked his study whenever he left and told her never to touch anything inside. The isolation that once felt romantic now seemed deliberate, as if she had been placed somewhere no one could reach her. She began to wonder whether she had made a terrible mistake. One gray afternoon, while Daniel was away gathering what he called field samples, Aisha decided to clean the bedroom. It was one of the few things that helped her feel useful in the quiet cabin. As she swept beneath the bed, her broom struck something solid. Curious, she crouched down and pulled out a dusty wooden box. Inside, wrapped in a faded scarf, was a small collection of jewelry, delicate rings, silver bracelets, and a locket containing a photograph of a smiling woman she didn't recognize. For a long moment, Aisha just stared, confusion prickling into unease. Daniel had never mentioned anyone before her. When he returned that evening, she said nothing, hiding the box exactly where she had found it. But her mind kept circling back to it, searching for explanations that didn't feel right. The following days brought more questions. She noticed faint scratch marks along the wooden floor near the back door, as though something heavy had been dragged out. The cabin, once charmingly rustic, now felt like a place filled with secrets. At night, the wind carried strange sounds through the forest. Sometimes, it was just the creak of branches or the call of an owl, but other times, it sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. Aisha pressed her face to the window once, trying to see through the fog, but saw only darkness staring back. Daniel's behavior grew more unsettling. He had begun keeping a locked notebook with him at all times, scribbling in it when he thought she wasn't watching. The once gentle man who spoke of stars and nature now seemed cold and distant. The more Aisha tried to convince herself it was all her imagination, the louder the silence around her became. Something in that house was deeply wrong. Daniel's work had always been a mystery to Aisha. He spoke vaguely about environmental studies, mapping forest patterns, and collecting soil samples, but she never saw him do any of it. His backpack was always full when he left at dawn and empty when he returned at night. One morning, after another restless night, curiosity got the better of her. As soon as he disappeared into the woods, she followed the faint trail of his footprints through the snow. The path wound deep between the trees, farther than she had ever gone before. After nearly an hour, she stumbled upon a small wooden structure hidden behind a cluster of pines. It was a shed, old, weathered, and locked with a heavy padlock. Peering through a tiny crack in the boards, she caught glimpses of what lay inside: scattered maps, photographs pinned to the wall, and plastic bags labeled with names she didn't recognize. Her breath fogged the glass as panic crept up her spine. It didn't look like research, it looked like evidence. Before she could see more, a faint crunch of footsteps echoed behind her. She quickly ran back to the cabin, forcing herself to act normal. When Daniel returned that evening, his hands were dirt-stained, his expression unreadable. He spoke little and avoided her eyes. That night, she lay awake, listening to the floor creak under his steps. She wanted to believe she had misunderstood, that there was a reasonable explanation. But every instinct screamed that the man she trusted was hiding something terrible. Her dreams were filled with the images she had glimpsed through that crack. Faces of strangers frozen in photographs, names written neatly on bags, and a map marked with red circles. Whatever Daniel was doing, it had nothing to do with nature. The following morning, Aisha tried to send a message to her sister back home, but her phone displayed only a blank signal icon. She waited for Daniel to leave before searching the cabin for another device. His laptop sat on the desk in the study, but it was locked with a password. Every drawer she opened was filled with neatly arranged documents, none of which made sense to her: weather data, topographic charts, and faded photographs of women she didn't know. Her hands trembled as she closed them quickly, feeling like she had crossed an invisible line. When Daniel returned, she pretended to be busy making tea, though her heart pounded so loudly she feared he might hear it. Later that day, she went to pack a small bag, thinking she might find her way to the nearest road if she left before sunrise. But when she opened the closet, her suitcase was gone. Her passport, which she always kept inside, had vanished too. Panic struck her like a wave. When she confronted Daniel, his expression remained calm as he explained he had moved her things for safety. He said it so gently that it sounded almost reasonable, but his eyes were cold, unblinking. That evening, she noticed how he watched her while she ate, his gaze steady and detached, as if studying her reactions. The air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. She could no longer tell when he was joking or when he was testing her. Every sound in the cabin made her flinch. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she realized there was no one to call, no one who even knew where she was. The truth was no longer avoidable. She wasn't living with her fiancé, she was trapped. The snow had begun to fall heavier that week, blanketing the mountains in a silence that felt almost suffocating. Daniel's routine stayed the same, leaving early and returning after dark, but Aisha noticed new patterns in his behavior. He spent more time in the shed she had once discovered, and his trips grew longer. One afternoon, when the storm clouds gathered and he rushed out claiming he had to check his equipment, she decided to follow her instincts once more. She waited until the sound of his truck faded completely before heading into the woods. The forest was eerily still, the snow crunching under her boots the only sound she could hear. When she reached the shed, the lock was missing, as if Daniel had forgotten to secure it in his hurry. Inside, the air was cold and heavy with the scent of metal and earth. On a table near the back sat a folder marked Subject 03, Emily. A photograph of a young woman was clipped to the front, her face peaceful but unfamiliar. A handwritten note below it read, "Last seen November 14th, 2021. Her heart hammered as she flipped through the papers. There were other folders too, labeled with different names and dates. Then she noticed a large map on the wall. Red XS dotted the forest area surrounding the cabin, each marked with coordinates. One of them sat dangerously close to where she stood now. It was clear these weren't research sites. They were something far darker. Aisha stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. The realization settled like ice in her chest. Daniel had been tracking women, documenting them, and possibly worse. She left everything as it was and ran back to the cabin, her breath shallow, her mind repeating one chilling thought. She was next. That night, the storm finally arrived. The wind roared through the trees, shaking the cabin walls, and snow fell so thickly that the world outside disappeared in a white blur. Aisha sat by the dim glow of a lantern, staring at the door and listening for Daniel's footsteps. She had spent the entire day pretending everything was normal, forcing herself to smile while planning her escape in silence. When he finally went to bed, she waited until his breathing grew steady before pulling on her coat and boots. The cold bit her skin instantly as she stepped outside. The air was heavy, and the forest seemed alive with whispers of wind and cracking branches. She followed the narrow path that led downhill, clutching a flashlight she had taken from the kitchen. Every step felt louder than the last. But then, a faint beam of light appeared behind her, Daniel's flashlight cutting through the storm. Her pulse raced as she pushed forward, snow soaking her clothes, her lungs burning with every breath. The forest swallowed her in darkness, but she didn't stop. She stumbled, falling into a mound of snow, and as she tried to rise, her light revealed a shallow pit covered with loose branches. Inside the pit were scraps of clothing, a broken shoe, and something pale beneath the frost. Horror twisted her stomach as she realized what she was looking at. Before she could react, the crunch of boots came from behind her. The beam of Daniel's flashlight stopped on her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his voice, calm and low, was lost in the wind as he stepped closer. Aisha screamed and ran blindly into the storm, her heart pounding against the darkness, desperate for a path that didn't end. When Aisha regained consciousness, she was lying on the cold floor of the shed, her wrists bound tightly with rope. A faint lantern light flickered nearby, throwing shadows across the walls. Daniel was sitting at the table, calmly writing notes in a small book as if nothing unusual had happened. His voice was soft when he finally spoke, describing his project as if it were something noble. He said he was preserving beauty before it vanished, capturing moments of purity untouched by the world. To him, the women in the folders weren't victims. They were subjects of his obsession, each chosen carefully for reasons only he understood. Aisha listened in silence, too terrified to move. When he left briefly to fetch something from the cabin, her eyes darted around the room. The same folders lay stacked on a shelf, and the air smelled of dust and chemicals. Near her feet, a shard of broken glass glimmered faintly. She twisted her body, cutting into the rope, each motion slicing her skin. Pain didn't matter, escape did. Outside, the wind howled and snow whipped against the shed walls. She didn't know how much time she had before he returned. When the final strand snapped, she stumbled to her feet, her hands shaking. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound seeming deafening in the storm. Every nerve screamed for her to move faster. The forest stretched before her, dark, endless, and full of danger, but anything was better than staying. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of Daniel calling her name, almost gently, as if coaxing a frightened child. She didn't look back. Her breath turned to mist in the cold air as she vanished into the trees, running for her life through the merciless snow. Aisha stumbled through the forest, her feet sinking into deep snow with every desperate step. The freezing wind cut into her skin, but she couldn't stop. The storm had turned the mountains into a blur of white, and her flashlight flickered weakly before dying completely. Darkness pressed in from every side. She followed the faint outline of a downhill slope, hoping it would lead her somewhere, anywhere away from him. Branches tore at her coat, and the sound of cracking ice echoed beneath her boots. Her lungs burned, her breath shallow and ragged. Behind her, she thought she heard movement, faint and distant, but the storm made it impossible to tell if it was real. After what felt like hours, she saw a faint glow through the trees. It was weak at first, then brighter, a light from a cabin or shelter. Gathering the last of her strength, she pushed forward, stumbling out of the forest and into a clearing. It wasn't another home. It was a ranger station. She banged on the door, sobbing, until a voice answered from inside. 2 park rangers pulled her in, wrapping her in blankets as she tried to explain everything through trembling lips. Within hours, helicopters were dispatched to search the mountain. Aisha sat inside the ranger station, watching the snow swirl outside the window, her hands shaking. The officers spoke in hushed tones over their radios. When dawn finally broke, a report came through. Daniel's cabin was burning. The shed was destroyed, reduced to smoldering wood and ash. No one had seen Daniel. Among the ruins, search teams found fragments of burnt folders, scraps of paper, and bones too damaged to identify. Aisha listened in silence, her relief clouded by a haunting thought. Daniel might still be alive. Weeks passed, and the snow on the mountain began to melt, revealing the scars left behind by the fire. Aisha was still in Vancouver, recovering under police protection. She barely slept, haunted by flashes of Daniel's face and the eerie calmness in his voice. Investigators combed through what was left of the cabin, hoping to find answers. Most of the evidence had been destroyed, but one of the search teams found a small metal box buried near the base of a tree. Inside was a USB drive, somehow untouched by the flames. When the detectives opened it, what they found made even the most seasoned officers fall silent. The drive contained dozens of video clips, each one labeled with a woman's name and date. The footage showed Daniel speaking to the camera, describing his subjects as if they were part of a study. He filmed their smiles, their movements, even their final moments before the screen went dark. The last file bore Aisha's name. It ended abruptly with her terrified face staring into the lens, followed by Daniel's whisper. Perfection doesn't last forever. The authorities ruled the case unresolved. Daniel's body was never found, and no conclusive evidence confirmed whether he died in the fire or escaped into the wilderness. Aisha tried to rebuild her life, but every sound of wind or rustling leaves brought the mountains back to her mind. She moved into a small apartment in the city, avoiding mirrors and windows at night. Months later, a hiker reported seeing strange footprints near the ruins, large, fresh, and leading into the woods. The search resumed briefly but found nothing. Locals began to call the place cursed. Aisha never returned, but sometimes she dreamed of the forest, and in those dreams, she could still hear Daniel softly calling her name.